Hey, this is Tilak. Welcome back to our fast formula tutorial. Today we are going to look at that GSP ladder level eligibility fast formulas second part. In the first part, we validate that probation period as well as that the step sequence or step number. The third part, we didn't do that. That is basically validating the ceiling step. If a person is already in the ceiling step, he is not eligible for the process. We didn't do that because the eligibility fast formula does not support grade ID as a context. Since it is not supporting the grade ID as a context, we cannot get the ceiling ID, ceiling step ID. I said in the last tutorial that there's a workaround way. We cannot do it directly. There's a workaround way. We can do that. Today we are going to see how the workaround, how we are going to do the workaround. The logic is we are going to use the parent and child fast formula, or the formula is calling a formula logic. If we don't know about the formula or parent and formula calling formula or parent and child, I use the term parent and child, but it is basically a formula is calling a different formula. If you don't know, it is already explained in our beginner tutorial. You can have a look, I try to provide the link in the description. Okay, how do we do that? I give a kind of before we get into writing formula, I give a small explanation, so that would be easy for you to understand. When the formula is calling other formula, we can pass anything as an input value or a context ID. It's the same like syntax. You are passing something as an input value. The input value is there as a context, it will become a context. Okay, if it is not there, if it is the context is not supported in that the child or the target fast formula, that became input value. It's a simple logic. The same syntax which pass that either context or input value. We can take a formula type that supports a grade ID. Assume that we are using a person selection which supports that the person selection formula supports the context grade ID context. So now what we can do here is we can pass a grade ID into that formula as a context. Then that child formula can use that context. So the context is passed to there as a context as a grade ID. It has access to the ceiling ID, all this the related the DBA. Then that can use the way we did the person selection formula. Same logic. If you haven't seen our person selection formula, please see that. So we are going to use the same logic into a child formula to get the ceiling step name, and that will be passed back to the parent formula, or that can validate over there. That's two way you can do that. You can validate over there everything, you can pass yes or no, or you can pass the step name back to the parent formula. The parent formula can validate. Either way it is perfectly fine. Now, how do we get the grade ID to pass from here, the parent to child? The grade ID does not support it in that eligibility formula. How do we get that? Since we have assignment ID as a context, we can get the grade ID from the assignment. The DBA, there is a DBA called per ASG grade ID. That is for the assignment ID, whatever the grade ID is attached to the assignment ID, that you can get it into the DBA. So we get the DBA value, pass that grade ID into the child formula. The child formula uses the grade ID as a context, and that has access to the grade ID, the ceiling ID, the step ceiling ID at DBA. Then from the DBA ID we can call that payroll value set, get the name of the ceiling, then we can pass the ceiling name back into the parent formula. The parent formula can validate that. Let's see how do we write the first formula using the logic I explained. Let's go to the end. We go to the first formula. I'm going to create a person selection. Okay, I called it GSP child age. Okay, I copy the name and keep it somewhere. It's a person selection. Compensation person selection. Compensation person selection. Date is 1/1/2000. There we go here. Okay. Look like, okay, I'll make it GSP child age. Okay. Okay, function is get the ceiling step name and pass return the same. Okay, well, okay, how do I do that? Okay, you can you can use that same code, almost the same code from the person selection. So I'm also going to use the same code. Okay, so I'm copying and pasting that code because most of the code I already explained in the person selection. So we are not going to get into very detail into that. Okay, copying paste, I have to be careful. Okay, now here basically I'm using the ceiling step ID, effective start date, effective date, end date as a DBAs. This is an array DBA or a range DBA. That's the reason that the syntax is default data value. So we are using that. Okay, we are not using any input value. Okay, the grade ID, we get a step ID from the grade ID, we passed it. Okay, now the other one I'm going to do here is, okay, L data, set lock, entering, okay, I'm also get the grade ID and the effective date as a context. Okay, okay, grade, get context, grade ID -1 as a default, e date, context, effective date. Okay, this is our default value. So now we got the context of effective date. This is what we are giving it. Okay, so now what we do, we log both. Okay, data, okay, set log, okay, here, log this one. I am also going to write the effective date. So I am also going to log the effective date. Okay, now effective date. Sorry. Effective date. Effective date. Okay, now I got the effective date. Now what we do? Okay, I'm going to create two variables. One is the step ID to get the step and the step name. That is what we are going to return. Okay, step ID -1 step name space. Okay, and I am going to return the step name. Oh, sorry, step name I am going to return. So return return step name. So I am saving it. I know that starting point, I know that. Now I have to put the logic. Now I am going to get the step name. Okay, that I'll copy and paste because already we explained that line by line into that person selection formula. I'll come here. I'll copy and paste the logic, then I'll explain it. Okay, we are getting the first index of the step ID. Then we are going through that ceiling step ID. Like, the ceiling step ID, we are taking the first index, using the index, going through that. Then we are taking the start date, end date. Then we are logging that if the start date, end date within that effective date, then we are basically using the step ID. We are getting the step ID because, okay, what happened? The ceiling step array give you all the step ID for the grade. I mean, all this for the grades, all this, the table is basically date tracked. So probably you get all the date tracked informations. So we are trying to pick up the correct date tracked value, which is part of the effective date. We are getting it. So we got the index of that. Okay. Now the step ID is not -1. It means the step ID is some ID we are passing that. If that is the case, then we are using the step ID to get the step name. So the step name is coming here and the step name will be written. That's all we are doing here. It's a simple logic. I hope. Submit. Okay, I'm compiling it. Okay, I go back. GSP child eligibility. Correct. Okay, what is the wrong here? It says grade ID. Okay, I supposed to use the grade, not a grade ID. Okay. Grade ID. Okay. Now when you are coming here, so we don't use the grade anymore. Now the child pass formula got compiled. So we are returning a step name and the formula name is GSP child age. Okay. Now let's get into the parent pass formula. Okay, I will get into that ID. I'm edit correcting that. Okay, now but elig. Okay, now what we do? Okay, we are going to use default for per assignment grade ID. Okay, you may ask me, how do I know all these things? Like, what is the database item there? Okay, you can basically search here as a, like, per and assignment grade, something like that. Like, you can go with that, the known information, you can search that. Okay, I have my personal way of doing it. Sometimes I run a SQL, or sometimes I have my own application to get the information, but you can do that here also. Okay, now here you can detach that. You can go for, sorry, you can go for it attribute. Too much of information is here. Probably, okay, this is what is I'm looking for that. Okay, and detach. Okay, so assignment ID is, and that is, that it says that if you looked at that, it says number, so it is a -1 is this one, per ASG grade ID. So here also I can say that here, for example, like, if I am looking for ID generally, per assignment ID here. So here basically other way you can do that here is, like, you can basically, like, what you can do here, add to formula. This way also you can add that. Okay. Now initialize, I defaulted the grade ID. Now what I can do here is, here I can also print the grade ID. Grade ID, since it's a number, it also goes, it is there already. Okay, probably like, okay, per assignment grade ID is there, that is fine. Now what I do? Okay, now we got the assignment grade ID, and now we are going to put the validation on that, or we are going to call the child formula. When do we call it? The first one is failed, we don't care, we don't have to worry about the second one because it failed, the first one itself failed. If the second one failed, we don't have to worry about that. If the second one also passed through, then we are validating the third one. Okay. Okay. Now third one, what we do? Okay. First of all, we have to see that where the assignment grade ID has got a value. How do we check that? Okay. If ID was not defaulted, you can also say is equal to -1. It is the same thing, but this is the proper way of working. Okay, it was not defaulted, so it has got some value which is not -1. Now then I check whether my child first formula is exist or not. Okay. Okay, here I know that it is exist. Okay, most of the time you know that it's not, it is exist, but still it is better to do that. Somebody might have deleted, so it's a defensive way of coding. Okay, is executable. Okay, then okay, what is the name of the child first formula? I think it is GSP child Eligibility. I'm having it somewhere. Okay, GSP child Eligibility. So it is executable. If it is executable, so if it is exist, then what I do here? Now I am setting that context. Set input. Okay. Create ID. And that per assignment grade ID. Okay, I am setting the context, so I am putting input Okay, setting the context or setting the input is the same syntax. What happened when you are variable, when you are setting it like that, and when you are calling the child formula, if the child formula supports same name as a context, that will be taken as a context. If the same name is not there as a context, then that will be taken as a input value. So it's the same context. For example, if I have a child formula, same like same type like that eligibility type, I'm calling as a child, this will go as an input value. Okay, but our child formula is person selection that has got a grade ID as a context. So this will be taken as a context. Now I execute the first formula. Okay. Execute. Okay. There is also one more like way of you can call the first formula. In that there's the same line you can set the input, get the output. You don't have to write a 3-line, one more line to write it. But I prefer this one, that will make it easier, like easier to understand, and is an easier way of doing it. Okay, now after that, okay, seal step name. Okay, step name equal to get output. Okay, space is a default value. What is that? That is, I think that that output variable in the child formula is step name. So that is what we are going to use it. Okay, why are we giving a variable name here? A formula can return more than one variable. So now this output statement says what variable is getting it. If I have one more variable, one more return variable from a child formula, I can have one more get output. Okay, so I am logging that set log. Sealing. Okay, since it's a string, this goes directly. Okay, if now I'm validating that. Okay, not equal to space, that's a default value, and child name equal to step name. Am I right? Create step name. So this says if the sealing step name is not defaulted, whatever the default value, basically it returns something, and the sealing step name is, the sealing step is equivalent of the current step, then make the guy ineligible. That is all simple logic. Okay, eligible is no. Okay. I don't think we have a data, but the log tell you how it is getting executed, everything it will tell you. Exactly. Okay. Save. Okay. Compile. Okay, it is compiled perfectly fine. So now what we do, we go back to that ladder setup and make sure that the eligibility is, I mean, it has got a right eligible profile. Okay, GSP person eligibility, that's the right one. Now we are going to execute it. Okay. It is troubling every time you are coming back. Okay. Okay, we choose that we are not going for a person selection, we are not selecting a person selection because we got nothing to do with the person selection this time. So I am submitting the process, and we are interested in the child process. I explained last session why we are interested in the child process. So let's see. Okay, the child process is succeeded. Now we will see the log. We will get into that first line. Start date. Okay, entering the eligibility. This is the grade ID. Effective date is that current date. Assignment ID is there. Probation date is null. That's the reason we are getting a default value. Current grade is 1. Per grade step name, the current step name is, step is 1, step name is 1A, and whatever that, this is all other information, input values. Now he is getting into the child here. If you look at the grade ID, it is a context. It is the same as this one, now that grade ID is the same because it goes as a context. Now effective date is again the passed as this one. If you look at that, we didn't pass the effective date, it's automatically passed in, because whenever there is a context in the parent and the same context used in the child, it automatically goes in. You don't have to pass it explicitly. It is internally happens. And this is the loop. Within the loop, we have a date track row, so it is trying to pick up the right. It is trying to pick up the row within this date, the effective date, probably the last one. If you look at that, 10, after 9. So this is the one. So it is picking up the current step ID. So now we are calling that payroll step value with the step ID, that is returning a step name as a 4 as the ceiling step. Now the ceiling step is coming back to the child, and it is printed in the child as a step 4. Now the validation happened, so the step is there and the step is not equal to person current step name, so it is passed. So you are returning a Y. So it is working the way we want it, and every validation going through, every validation happening the way we expected. This is how you can use the ceiling ID for your validation. I hope sooner or later they will add more input values, so you don't have to go through all these workarounds. Okay. If you have any question, comments, let me know. Or if you want to have some kind of a logic has to be written, let me know the logic. I'll try to give a kind of a tutorial on that. Thank you. Till I see you with the other tutorial. Bye.